to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you'll never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, May 18th, 2015, start of a brand new week of utter insanity, courtesy of the United States government, the sweetest-smelling government on planet Earth. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick little program note. Donald Jeffries, author of the book Hidden History, will be our third-hour guest on Thursday. Just reading through this book, it just very concisely covers all of these deceptions and cover-ups and bits of hidden history that we've been talking about here for the last 21 years. And it's definitely a good book to get for anybody who just is utterly clueless as to what's been going on in this country since the Kennedy assassination. And there's a huge amount of stuff to get through here. Now then, the humanitarian pause in Yemen is now over. The Arab coalition is resuming airstrikes in Yemen. And once again, they're hitting civilian infrastructure, food supplies, water, all of the stuff to punish the Yemenite people for daring to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler. Saudi Arabia actually jumped the gun and bombed Yemen's capital just ahead of the expiration of that deadline. And Saudi Arabia is just a proxy working for the U.S. government to go in and slap those Yemeni people around and say, look, how dare you get rid of your U.S. puppet ruler. Don't you understand the rules that we just made up? Once you are conquered, you stay conquered. Now, of course, the big news coming out of Iraq is that ISIS, or what we're being told is ISIS, succeeded in recapturing the city of Ramadi. U.S. troops that were at the Habanaya base had to leave, had to run. And they're saying, oh, this is ISIS. This is all ISIS. I don't think so. ISIS is just a bunch of guys with a video production crew creating videos to have a new enemy for us for our 2-minute hate. I think these are the people of Iraq trying to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler, and the U.S. government just calls them ISIS to obfuscate that fact. Anybody who opposes U.S. imperialism, oh, it's ISIS, just stop thinking there. Just know that you got to kill them. Got to send your kids out to be killed and crippled to get those mean old ISIS. Don't need to look at why they're opposing U.S. control. And apparently, up to 500 Iraqi civilians and soldiers were killed by ISIS in Ramadi. It sounds like more than just a little fringe group. It sounds like a mass uprising of the people. 8,000 people had to flee. And now, of course, everybody's saying the Battle of Baghdad is on. ISIS is holding a victory parade in Ramadi. They are just 60 miles from the capital city. And on their way through to the capital city, there we go. On their way through to the capital city, they're going to go through Abu Ghraib. And I imagine that they will probably take that building apart and hold up for world inspection what was going on in there when the U.S. government was torturing innocent Iraqis to death to find weapons of mass destruction that simply did not exist. Now, they're already ramping up the Booga Booga, and I'm looking at this story that came out of Russia Today, where Europe is saying that ISIS is being smuggled into Europe disguised as refugees. Those gosh darn refugees, they may not be real refugees. They may be working for ISIS. So they're trying to sell this idea that ISIS is already in Europe. ISIS is already in the United States of America. Clearly, they are trying to set the stage for a new false flag to get us all to be so angry and furious at ISIS that we won't ask those embarrassing questions for which they don't really have a bunch of answers. Let's see. Over in Ukraine, they're making a big deal on the BBC about how Russian special forces captured in Ukraine. And the headline reads looks like they caught the entire army on the ground there. But if you go further down into the story, you will find that what they caught were 2 Russian soldiers. Just two. Two. Fighting with the rebels in eastern Ukraine. Now, Russia's position is Russia is not supporting the eastern Ukraine, but they acknowledge that individual Russian citizens of their own free will have gone to join the rebels. So they caught these two, and they're trying to take these two guys and turn it into a Russian invasion. Now, Ukraine and China have just signed a $2.4 billion currency swap deal. Kiev is doing it to try and relieve pressure on its currency, which is being driven downward. It's lost 40% of its value against the U.S. dollar in a year when the U.S. dollar is itself plunging. That's how bad it is. Now, this, of course, is not going to please Poroshenko's masters in Europe and the United States and the ECB and the IMF and the Fed one tiny, tiny bit. And it's another indicator that Poroshenko, I think, is losing it, because he's making all these knee-jerk decisions, and they're not really working out too well. Now, over at the Donetsk People's Republic, they're accusing Kiev's security service of preparing to commit false flag terrorist acts in the run-up to the coming EU summit on the situation in Ukraine. And yes, they probably are, because remember how the people in Kiev came to power. False flag terror. This is what they know how to do. And they were taught how to do it by the United States of America. Now, over in the State Department, Victoria Nuland is out there talking about how there's going to be a bigger role for the United States in the Minsk II Accords. And this is the United States trying to recover from the huge political embarrassment of the original Minsk Agreement, which was arrived at between Ukraine, the Eastern Ukrainian republics, and Russia, and the U.S. wasn't even invited. And so now they're trying to sort of bully their way into the next round of talks so that they can act like this is all their idea. Go on in and take credit for other people's work. Go on in and act like peace in Ukraine is the U.S. idea instead of Putin's victory. Go on in after the Pakistanis have killed Obama and say, Osama, we got him. And by the way, they've done it again with this ISIS leader in Syria. Syria is saying they got this guy. And the U.S. is saying, oh, of course, that's nonsense. That's not. We got him. We sent in special forces. We caught and killed this ISIS leader. Now, down in Macedonia, they're having to deal with democracy American style. In other words, it's another covert U.S. overthrow. We have an article that came out of S.J. Lenman Blogspot. It's another attempted color revolution in Macedonia. Victoria Nuland is already linked into what's going on. The anti-government protests in Skopje were being joined by foreign ambassadors. This is not a genuine popular uprising against an abusive government. It's another manufactured overthrow, like the U.S. has this long history of doing. Iran in 1953, Chile in 1973, Ukraine last year, not exactly a stellar success. But this is what's going on. The U.S. is simply going around the world overthrowing governments that will not do what the U.S. tells them to do and replacing them. Now, as I mentioned before, the U.S. government is now taking credit for this ISIS leader killed in Syria, even though Syria's government announced his death first and said their guys got him. And the U.S. is out there saying, no, we got him. We're the heroes. We're the good guys. We got him. And I think one of the reasons for this panic reaction, of course, is the U.S. is trying to maintain that ISIS is an adversary. And it isn't. ISIS works with the U.S. government to manufacture the justification for war and conquest. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I basically want to go back and reiterate a point I've made many times before, but you need to keep this in mind. ISIS is a made-up enemy. It's a fake. It's as fake as the torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. It's as fake as the Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. It's as fake as Al-Qaeda was. They have this bunch of guys with a video production crew making all of these horrific movies to get you to think there's an evil enemy out there called ISIS that must be destroyed at all costs. And then anytime the United States of America wants to invade a country or put down a rebellion in a country they've already conquered, they'll say, oh, look, there's ISIS. So that nobody questions having to go back into Iraq for the third time, having to go back into Yemen for the second time, having to go back into Libya for the second time. Now, over at RINF.com, they've got a story about how yet more video footage has surfaced showing the Israel Defense Forces treating wounded members of ISIS fighting against Assad. And this is on top of a United Nations report that found that the IDF and Assad's opponents, the hired mercenaries, and ISIS are in regular contact. Remember the book 1984 by George Orwell? They created an enemy that everybody was supposed to hate, Emmanuel Goldstein. And they'd put his face up on the view screens, and everybody would have their 2-minute hate of just yelling and screaming to just hate him without question, without analysis. Nobody dared ask why we were supposed to hate Emmanuel Goldstein. All we knew is that we were supposed to hate him and sacrifice whatever it took to defeat him. And of course, in Orwell's book, Emmanuel Goldstein didn't exist. He was a fictional creation of the state, and ISIS is exactly the same thing. Every one of these so-called ISIS videos of beheadings and all the rest of it all come from one source, Site Intelligence Group, run by Rita Katz, whose father was executed as an Israeli spy, and she is linked in both with Mossad and CIA. It's a fake. So the U.S. government doesn't have to explain to you why they had to go back into Iraq for a third time, or Yemen for a second time, or Libya for a second time, because they know the American people aren't going to say, look, if those countries don't want U.S. puppet rulers, pull out the U.S. puppet rulers, because my child's life has more value to me than U.S. government banker hegemony over the world. But if they can get you to hate ISIS, ooh, bad ISIS, ISIS is going to get you. ISIS is hiding under your bed. ISIS is stealing cookies out of your cookie jar. And then Americans will say, yes, I'm willing to send my child to death and disfigurement to get the evil ISIS. That's the scam that's going on right now. Now, speaking of Israel, as you know, I have pointed out over the last more than a few years, the utter humiliation Americans feel to see all of our candidates for office begin their campaign with a trip to Israel to meet with Israel's leadership, to get their permission to be an elected official inside the United States of America, and to get that obligatory photo touching the Wailing Wall and looking serious with a yarmulke on their head. And apparently trying to explain it away, an Israeli Defense Forces Major General came out and said, well, we Israelis, we're sure we're the center of the world. It's natural that candidates in other countries are coming to Israel. Yeah, we sort of figured that was the attitude. The problem is, the rest of the world doesn't see Israel as the center of the world. And if it is, the world is in serious, serious trouble if you look at how the government of Israel treats its own people. Now, Israel just got done celebrating Jerusalem Day. Netanyahu got out there and proving that his new ultra right-wing government is just gone right over the top, is out there now declaring Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish people alone. This is our home and here we will stay. But he's basically saying Jerusalem should be for the Jewish people only. Everybody else, get out. Now, of course, under the original United Nations plan to create the nation of Israel, Jerusalem wasn't part of it. When Israel declared war on Palestine to try and capture Jerusalem and got part of it, the UN came in and said, okay, here's the deal. Too many religions, too many people see Jerusalem as being important. So the United Nations declared Jerusalem an international city. And they divided it into 4 sections. And the Jews get one quarter, the Orthodox get another, the Christians get another, the Muslims get another. That's what the United Nations wanted, basically representing the will of the people of planet Earth, or at least all the member nations. Israel, of course, holds the world record in defying United Nations resolutions, and their attitude is, it's all ours. And Netanyahu also added that the only way to deal with Palestinian terror is to go on building more illegal settlements until the Palestinians are all gone. Meanwhile, there was a video we linked to, Israeli crowds celebrating Jerusalem Day with an anti-Palestinian rampage in the Old City, marching around, causing damage, screaming death to the Arabs. Apparently, settlers were allowed to visit the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is a definite slap in the face to the Muslims. Now, can you imagine if any group was marching around the United States of America screaming death to the Jews, what would the U.S. corporate media say about it? And here we have Israelis marching around Jerusalem screaming death to the Arabs. Corporate media could care less. In fact, the corporate media takes pride in towing the official line. I'm the best journalist there is because I never question. I'm a proud American prostitute and correspondent. That's my job. Meanwhile, the Freedom Flotilla 3 has begun set sailing to Gaza today. The first ship taking part set sail from Gothenburg, Sweden. Nearly 5,000 miles to Gaza. It will be joined by other ships along the way. They are saying they are not afraid of Israeli brutality. They should be, because Israel is a brutal nation, and they have killed people on the previous humanitarian aid flotillas in international waters. We're coming up on another commercial break. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Do join us on the air. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the reality is, despite all the tough talk, Israel's standing in the world is plunging rapidly. They're losing the propaganda battle, the diplomatic battle, the public image battle. And from this point forward, everything they do to try and regain it is only going to make the situation worse. The Vatican has come out against them. In fact, the Vatican just canonized 2 Gaza nuns. Gaza now has their own saints. European Union stepping up pressure. Countries around the world, everywhere Israel goes and says, make it a crime to criticize Israel, make it a crime to boycott Israel, and they're meeting tremendous resistance. Because in every one of those countries, passing such acts underscores a double standard, a hypocrisy. You can criticize and boycott anybody you want except Israel. Nobody's going to accept that in this modern world. They're not going to see it as anything other than the imposition of tyranny and dictatorship on behalf of a foreign power. And there are already too many governments around the world, including Washington, D.C., who are getting very nervous over the fact that their populations see them as puppets for Tel Aviv and not representative of the people of that nation. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. If the United States and England's economies collapse, I think Israel will be one of the first countries to go because they're pretty much a welfare state, right? I mean, they got universal health care. What are all those people going to do when they got to pay for, like, the majority of their health care?
Well, it's a problem. I mean, Israel, of course, sucks a tremendous amount of wealth from the rest of the world. Very little of it actually reaches ordinary Israeli people. In fact, it's an ongoing scandal. The few remaining survivors of the slave labor camps from Nazi Germany are always in the commercials about, Holocaust reparations and take care of the Holocaust survivors, and yet the money somehow disappears between your checkbook and those people who really actually do genuinely need it. And so it's basically, I would say, all governments are corrupt. Israel has to be one of the world record holders. Israel's got the Olympic gold medal for corruption. And yes, they are a parasitic nation. And when the global economy collapses, Israel's going to be kind of stuck because the world is going to turn away from private central banking, and Israel's political system is very much tied in with all those private central banks.
They'll be leeching on to the Chinese, to the Russians, to the next, that's the emerging Eurasian economic superbloc.
I don't think the Russians or the Chinese are going to be open to that. I mean, they've seen what it's done to Europe and the West. And I think there's going to be a huge backlash against private central banking, and Israel doesn't want to have any other kind of bank but private central banking.
It's pretty sad, though, how they use the Holocaust. They'll just use, not all, it's just a small minority of the Zionists that will use, like, the World War II, what happened as just to take advantage of everybody, including their own people. Their own people are treated like crap over there. It's a small percentage of people that, like over here, that rule the majority. All governmental structures involve some kind of a minority ruling the majority. In a republic, that minority is supposed to be representing the majority. In a democracy, the minority is supposed to be chosen to represent the majority. Unfortunately, what most of this large centralized governments tend to be is a one-stop shopping center for corrupting influences. And these days in Washington, D.C., they're not even trying to hide the fact. That's what's going on. They're just there with their hands out and their wallets open and, setting up barriers to all kinds of activities, and then they'll sell special access through the barriers. That's how government becomes rich. That's how politicians become rich. They'll pass a law against X for everybody, and then they'll sell exceptions. It's not unlike the old indulgences game that the Catholic Church used to do, where they had all these things, thou shalt not do, the 10 Commandments and all the sins, but you could go out and commit the sin as long as you would buy an indulgence from the Catholic Church. That's how politics works. We're going to pass sanctions against Iran, and none of you can do business with them except this guy who makes a campaign donation and gets an exception to sell airplanes to Iran or these kind of parts to Iran. That's how it works. It's a modern system of indulgences run on the secular side rather than the theocratic side. Hey, Mike, I want to switch to Ukraine real quick about the swap facility. What's your take on that's just bizarre, isn't it?
They're coming up with more and more of these complex financial systems to make it look like the system is still operating, but it isn't. Each one is just a more convoluted form of trying to hide the fact that everybody's run out of cash, the debt is overwhelming. This new move by Poroshenko to sign a currency swap deal with China is signaling he may be ready to break with the European Union, which, of course, was the whole reason the U.S. put him in Kiev in the first place. I would not be surprised if there was an assassination attempt against Poroshenko in the coming months.
Yeah, you better hire some of those right sectors to protect him.
Maybe so. All righty. Okay, there's the phone call there. Now then, getting on back to Israel here. As I mentioned before we took the phone call, we're at the point right now where Israel's public image is in serious, serious trouble. And they're at the point now where everything they do to try and justify what they're doing only makes matters worse. Okay, so we had over at Israel, the Minister of War, Moshe Yaalon, is out there trying to say that Israel should not be prosecuted for war crimes merely because civilians were being killed in Gaza, because after all, the U.S. killed civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I think the argument could be made that in World War II, the U.S. and Japan were pretty much peers. There was an openly declared state of war between them. And I don't agree with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki because Japan was trying to surrender. And Truman dropped those bombs purely to prove to the rest of the world that we had these horrible weapons and were psychotic enough to actually use them. It's a very different situation in Gaza, where Gaza is a captive population of Israel. They're not military peers. And there is no justification for killing civilians, certainly not the intentional targeting of them. As we know, many of the Israeli soldiers have now gone public to admit they were ordered to kill civilians in Gaza. It was an attempted, incomplete genocide. All righty, let's see. I need to skip on down here. Do you remember Megaphone? Let me back up here a little bit, because there is this Israeli government anti-Semitism conference. It was reported in the Jerusalem Post. And their primary agenda is out there saying that it is time to censor and control the Internet in order to block any criticisms of Israel. And again, it's the double standard and hypocrisy that is undoing them. You can criticize Obama, you can criticize Angela Merkel, but you may not criticize Israel. And nobody's going to go along with that. They're still pushing it. Now, do you remember Megaphone? Megaphone was this software system that Israel supporters use, where there's a little megaphone icon on their computer, and whenever one of them sees anything that criticizes Israel or challenges the Orthodox history of World War II, they would type in the notification on their megaphone, and it would pop up on the desk of every other Israel supporter, so they would all go in and gang up to scream anti-Semite at whoever dared to cross the line. Well, there's a new updated version called Canary Mission. We'll talk about that when they come back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And we were talking about the megaphone system, which was set up by Israel supporters. So they have a little icon on their computer screens where if they see something that criticizes Israel or questions the Orthodox dogma, they'll feed in the source in their little megaphone, and it pops up on the screen of all the other people subscribed to the system, so they all pile on to the discussion and come in and scream, you're a Jew hater, you're an anti-Semite, you're this, you're that, blah, 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 in order to shout them down. Well, it has now mutated, if you will, into a new form, and it's called the Canary Mission. And it looks, on the face of it, like it's supposed to be to combat online hate of all kind. But if you watch the video, there's two things that leap out. They particularly hit the issue of anti-Semitism, 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 and you know that Israel's current political idea, political agenda, is that criticism of Israel's government is anti-Semitism, which is kind of like saying criticizing the Nazis is hatred of the German people. And it doesn't make sense, but that's exactly their policy. So when Canary Mission is out there saying they want to fight anti-Semitism, what they're there to do is to fight criticism of Israel's government. And if you listen to their video presentation all the way to the very end, they admit the goal of this system is to deny employment to anybody whose name appears in their database. In other words, it's a blacklist, which, by the way, is illegal under U.S. law. But they're just putting it out there, and as near as I can tell, there are no controls. Anybody can put anybody's name on this list. And somebody who's a supporter of Israel will go in and say, oh, this person's name is on the list. We can't hire them anymore. Now, the whole point of the First Amendment, right to freedom of speech, is that you may say what your opinion is about anything without fear of retaliation. This whole Canary Mission's stated purpose is to subvert and undermine your First Amendment right to freedom of speech. Because freedom of speech is absolute. It's not qualified. If you can criticize Obama, but you can't criticize Netanyahu, you do not have free speech. You have permitted speech. And that's not the same thing. Free speech means you can put out your opinion supported with your facts without fear of repercussions. And the proper, correct response in a mature republic is the other side will come back and say, I disagree. This is my opinion and these are my facts. And you allow the audience to evaluate the facts and come to their own conclusion. When Israel resorts to these kind of tactics, blacklisting, censorship. It's basically a flashing neon sign that they recognize they cannot win an open, honest debate on the issues. They can't justify the illegal settlements. They can't justify the crushing attacks on the people of Gaza. They can't justify attacking humanitarian aid flotillas in international waters. They can't justify mass spying on the American people and the American government. They can't justify attacking the USS Liberty and trying to frame Egypt for it. And on and on and on and on. This is what I meant. Israel has hit the point where everything they do to try and perpetuate their public image is going to backflash on them. And the world sees them for who they really are. Now, moving on down to Saudi Arabia, a lot of people are very concerned over the fact that Saudi Arabia is supposed to be buddy-buddy with the United States of America. It is currently acting as the U.S. proxy to slap the Yemenite people around for kicking out their U.S. puppet ruler. And Saudi Arabia continues to have beheadings. They're beheading a political activist followed by a public crucifixion. Now, it's not crucifixion as we understand it from the Bible, where you're nailed up there alive. The crucifixion follows the beheading, and it is simply the display of the body for 3 days. Okay? But U.S. media doesn't say anything about it. Remember when ISIS was beheading people? Oh, horrible, horrible, horrible. Saudi Arabia beheads people? No big deal. The U.S. policy, as enshrined in the corporate media, is that ISIS beheadings are bad, and Saudi Arabia's beheadings are good. That really seems to be it. Again, more double standard, more hypocrisy. And double standards and hypocrisy are the hallmarks of dictatorship, where you have to believe one thing for one set of rules and then believe something entirely different for these over here. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves another phone call here. Peter in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I called in on Friday and talked a little bit about that agreement that Obama cut with Israel. And you checked out and said it was the NSA that made that agreement. I just wanted to clarify something. This is the way these agreements are made.
Yep.
If this is the NSA doing it with another country, especially when they're violating the Constitution, the NSA of even doing it in their own country, to sell that information to a foreign country, that would require a presidential signature and have to come up to the National Security Council. And the president would then sign that off and approve that. And he did it, of course. Obama gave all this information, all the NSA intercepts on every American. He did it for campaign contributions. He did it for money for probably bribes for himself, but at least for money for his campaigns, and frankly guaranteeing his reelection, really.
Well, let me go another way. There may have been another story. I mean, Israel may have already gotten information on Obama they could blackmail him with, and that is the real danger of the NSA's spy system. They're even spying on U.S. Supreme Court justices. They were spying on Obama while he was in the Senate. That's been confirmed. And so you have this unelected body with a long history of ignoring the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, shaping policy in the United States of America, and making these deals. We know that CIA has made deals with foreign countries without even notifying the executive branch. It is a violation of the Logan Act. Charlie Wilson's war in Afghanistan is a good example. A lot of that was being conducted without notifying the executive branch, more to give them deniability than anything else. Iran-Contra was conducted, at least officially, without knowledge of the White House, although it's pretty obvious that Vice President Bush knew about it. But the idea that the U.S. government is unified and in constant contact with each other is nonsense. The federal government is badly factionalized. Everybody's fighting turf wars. Everybody's keeping secrets from each other. And I'm not saying that Obama didn't sign some sort of a confirmation of this agreement. I don't think we should assume that, until we actually see the document with his signature on it. But let's get away from who signed what and get back to the issue of the NSA using our money to break into our computers, our phone calls, our emails, and then giving all of that information to Israel so that Israel can come back, steal our business secrets, or find information with which to blackmail us. And again, I want to go back to Chief Justice Roberts of the United States Supreme Court, who was opposed to Obamacare, and then at the 11th hour did a 180-degree turn, said, yes, it's legal under the Commerce Clause, ruled in favor of Obamacare, and then promptly left the country for a week's vacation in Malta to get away from the press firestorm. So I think the indications are that, yes, NSA and Israel do have information with which to blackmail the U.S. government. And there's nothing new there, because remember when that whole Clinton-Monica Lewinsky thing was going on? Where Bill Clinton actually told Monica Lewinsky somebody had made recordings of their phone sex sessions and were using it to put pressure on Obama, and it came out that the demand was to call the FBI off the hunt for Israel's top agent inside the administration, which a lot of people think was Rahm Emanuel. And so, this stuff is going on. And the NSA, for all of its talk about wanting a more secure America, has basically handed the keys to the kingdom to a foreign government.
Well, Michael, also, just a couple of months ago, remember when Michael Oren spoke, the Israeli ambassador spoke down at UC Irvine, and they then the UC system then made it basically illegal to criticize Israel. Then we have Canary, and then we have the horrible stultifying effect.
Peter, I'm sorry, we're at the top of the hour news break. I'm going to have to let you go. Everything you say is absolutely correct. We just ran out of time. All right, we'll be back after the news break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. I just put up a story at whatreallyhappened.com from the Jerusalem Post. The headline reads, Israel needs to reshape its relations with Sweden. And the tagline is basically, Israel's new government must take a firm stand in its relations with Sweden, following Sweden's acknowledgement of Palestine. Otherwise, it risks losing Europe. Now, first of all, there is a huge amount of arrogance on display here, with Israel presuming to go into other countries and say, you will recognize this and you will not recognize that, which we know Israel has been doing all over the world for decades. But they got away with it up until now because ordinary people weren't aware this was going on. That has now changed. I cannot imagine the government of Sweden backing off recognition of Palestine without losing face with their own people, no matter how much Israel screams and throws tantrums and kicks and rolls around on the floor, which they tend to do a lot. All righty, now getting back to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is now talking about buying off-the-shelf nuclear bombs from Pakistan. Pakistan does have nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia's government financed most of that research and development. And so Pakistan is probably not going to object whatsoever to selling nuclear weapons to Saudi Arabia. And the U.S. is not going to be in a position to resist or refuse that, even under the NNPT, because Saudi Arabia is now the U.S. proxy going into Yemen. And Obama last week basically indicated it's okay for the rest of the Middle East to arm themselves against a potentially nuclear Iran. So now you have Saudi Arabia buying real nuclear weapons to protect itself from nuclear weapons that we're told Iran might be thinking of building somewhere down the road, even though there's no evidence to support that. That's how completely screwed up the foreign policy is right now. Meanwhile, I'm sure over in Israel they're out there saying, you couldn't buy the nuclear weapons from us? We can get you the nukes wholesale here. We can't tell anybody we have them. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But if we did, we'd get you a better price. Remember, Israel was caught selling clandestine nuclear weapons, or trying to South Africa. And I suspect that if they were caught trying to sell nuclear weapons to South Africa, they'd probably been trying to sell nuclear weapons to other countries as well. The very activity the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent. Now, speaking of Iran, Rick Santorum is out there saying that he'll bomb Iran back to the 7th century. That's his solution to everything. We're worried that they may be thinking bad things about, we'll just bomb them back to the 7th century. Anyway. Now, back here in the real world, and Rick, here's your parachute and here's your rifle. I can almost see Rick Santorum in that wonderful scene from the movie Dr. Strangelove, where the bomb falls out of the plane and the plane's commander is riding it down like it's a bucking bronco, waving his hat and going, yee-ah! We need to get that and put Rick Santorum's face on there. But the reality is that the Iran sanctions are already collapsing. Germany is getting ready to sell them airplanes. European companies are selling Iran used aircraft. They're being delivered. Boeing is getting ready to sell passenger jets to Iran. It's already coming apart here. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a quick phone call. Slim up in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Michael. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.
I'm just calling, as you can see, I'm calling regarding the Middle East situation.
Yes.
My background is from Lebanon myself. I lived there for 3 years, so I saw firsthand what Israel is capable of and the things that they do and how heartless they really are. I mean, among other things, right? So, yes. So when you're the fact that you talk about, the subject that you bring up, the Israel subject, I got to hand it to you because everybody's afraid to talk about them like as if they're some boogeyman or something.
Well, I felt their wrath, not just Israel's wrath, the Clintons' wrath. I mean, that basically ended my career in Hollywood. And when we were running our business here in Hawaii, we had people from Israel calling all the local ad agencies and everything, saying, "Don't do business with them. They're evil. They question the Holocaust. They hate the Jewish people. They want Hitler to come back." And yada yada yada. This kind of stab in the back, strike in the dark kind of behavior, which signals that they know they actually cannot win the debate on its merits, on the facts, logic, and law.
That's true. I mean, for myself, I have to admit, when I lived there for 3 years and I saw what I saw, I was somewhat, labeled as anti-Semitic based on ignorance, right? Based on what I was living through. But then I moved back to Canada and I met a few people that were Jewish and totally changed my mind about it. So, I mean, it's obvious that, it's just like with cops. We're not against cops. We're just against the crooked ones, the ones that are the narcissists that, use and abuse their power rather than, and I'm not against Jews or Israelis or Israelis or even Zionists for that matter. I'm just against the people that are against the one that's talking about how the mothers of Palestine should all be killed and their kids as well and this and that.
You're absolutely right. And we try and keep a big black line around there because all the world's Jewish people are not collectively guilty for the crimes of Israel's government, just like all Americans are not collectively guilty for the crimes of the U.S. government, just like all the Muslims are not collectively guilty for the crimes of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who pretty much at this point seem to be fakes anyway.
See, that's the thing. People use America as like it's the Americans that are doing this. It's the Americans. No, it's not. It's the people that took over America that are doing this.
It's the U.S. government. It's the U.S.
Yeah. It's people that are like, they're taking those, like, your Clintons and whatnot, that are taking those handouts from all these, reporters and whatnot that are supposedly telling you the truth.
Yes.
So that's. I just wanted to bring that up, and I pray to God that there's one day, one day people will wake up and realize what the heck's going on over there, because, the news here, it's obvious it gives you one side of the story, but if you're there, you see the death and destruction, and there's no limits, and especially in Lebanon, there's no buffer, there's no filter as far as the news. They show you everything to anger you, to make you want to join the army and go up against them and basically be another pawn. So,
well, again, we have to understand Lebanon's problem is that Israel has been lusting after more of their territory. They've already invaded Lebanon a couple of times under very flimsy pretexts. Israel is desperate to conquer the land leading up to that Litani River. And Lebanon, in a very real sense, is fighting for its life. And I'm not surprised that Hezbollah has arisen in response to that.
Yeah, see, Hezbollah is everybody in Lebanon now is because they're the only ones that are fighting them. Everybody's respecting them, and they went from hating them now to from labeling them as a terrorist group now to loving them because they're the only ones that actually stick up for us. I don't. I think they're used. They're just like, you're just like your Obamas that are saying, "Oh, we're against ISIS and we're going to go against ISIS," but yet on the other hand, they're funding them and supporting them. Like, You know what I mean? I think they're doing the same thing is happening. Personally.
Well, you know, one of the dangerous things that happens when you create your opposition group is the possibility it may break free and actually become an opposition group. Israel's made that mistake with the PLO, with Hamas. Hamas was originally set up by Israel to be opposition to the PLO. Then when Yasser Arafat was assassinated, Hamas said, guess what? We're now the government of Palestine, and they cut off connection with Israel. Okay, and we just lost that phone line there. All right, that's always the danger when you're setting up a phony opposition group is they can break free and all of a sudden be a very real opposition group. And it's a big foreign policy whoopsie, and the U.S. keeps making it over and over and over again. But each new administration comes in and says, we can make it work this time because we're better than everybody who came before, which goes under the category of famous last words. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, because of Jeb Bush's little faux pas last week regarding Iraq, it has kicked up a firestorm of controversy, not whether or not he should have said it was a mistake to invade Iraq, but actually getting back to the question, was it a mistake? Was it wrong for the United States to attack Iraq, kill Saddam Hussein, over the claim that they had weapons of mass destruction? And it's rather enheartening to see how many people in politics and the corporate media are saying, yeah, actually that was kind of a boneheaded move here. But they're still pushing around the idea that the U.S. invaded Iraq because they had bad intelligence that made them think Saddam had nuclear weapons. One of them actually went out there and said Saddam himself was trying to claim he had nuclear weapons, thinking it would deter an invasion. All of this, of course, is nonsense. The 2003 invasion of Iraq had nothing to do with nuclear weapons and everything to do with oil. Because back in 2002, Iraq got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro under the Oil for Food program. That, of course, undermined the U.S. petrodollar. And that is why the U.S. government came up and said, oh, they've got nuclear weapons, we must invade, they'll be attacking us if we don't kill them now. And they went on in, lynched Saddam Hussein, put in a puppet government that is now being given the heave-ho by their people, and put Iraq's oil back on the world market only for the U.S. dollar. That was the real agenda. And so in order to counter this nonsense about, hey, it was a simple mistake, anybody could have made that mistake, no, we didn't make that mistake. We knew it was a lie right from the beginning. And so I posted a flashback link to an article I wrote on the subject of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, the lie of the last century, now that we've crossed over the millennial line. And basically it goes down all of the proven false claims made during the run-up to the war. And common sense has to tell you, if they really had intelligence that claimed Iraq had nuclear weapons, they would have shown that. Instead, they came up with all these lies about how balloon inflators were mobile biological weapons laboratories. And we have these documents from inside the British government saying, yeah, the decision was made to invade Iraq. We just got to come up with a good cover story. Because neither the British nor the American people are going to send their children to be killed and crippled over what currency oil is being sold for. So the British and American governments had to come up with a big, scary boogeyman, nuclear weapons of mass destruction, to trick you into sending your children, your own children, to death and disfigurement. And it's important to remember, this is how the U.S. starts wars. Lies, fraud, and deception. There were no torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. There was no Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. The Lusitania was carrying banned weapons of war, smuggling them to Great Britain. Pearl Harbor was not a surprise. Roosevelt goaded Japan into that, and then acted like it was a surprise. Those dastardly Japanese, we must go to war over there. Nobody wants to go to war. It's dangerous, dirty, ill-paying work. You lose bits of your body. Every time any ruler, anywhere in history, has wanted to initiate a war of conquest, they have to lie and trick their own people into it. The Gleiwitz incident, perfect case. Hitler sends his own people to attack the radio station in Gleiwitz, Germany, frames the Poles for it. So forth and so on. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I just want to put a few facts forward about Israel. Israel, more than 80% of the nation is drafted into the IDF. And this IDF is the one that's committing all these atrocities. So let's be clear, this is a completely different situation compared with the UK, the US, Australia, wherever. Because these people, at least 80% of the population are forced to serve in that army, in that air force, in that navy. And they're the ones that are machine gunning Palestinian fishermen. These are the ones that bombed Gaza into a complete stoneyard. It's ridiculous.
Okay, John, I think you're painting with way too wide a brush here, because when you get people into a military, the officers are always looking for people who are willing to do things that need to be done. They're not going to waste time trying to take the general conscript who's got a sense of morality and ethics and try and force them into committing atrocities. They look for those individuals that they've got under their control who are okay with doing that kind of thing. They are the ones promoted to the bomb sites, the machine guns, and so forth. And yes, those people are committing war crimes, and they should be held to account. But, you know, the guy who's repairing helicopter transmissions, he doesn't share the guilt, especially if he's a conscript.
But Michael, you've made your own argument previously when you explained that these soldiers going into Gaza were ordered to kill civilians.
Yeah, those particular soldiers who were sent into Gaza were selected because the Israeli high command knew they would obey those orders. Now they're having second thoughts about it. But I'm sure there's a lot of people in the Israeli military who weren't going to be comfortable with that, so they're in the back, you know, the rear echelon areas loading boxes of toilet paper onto trucks. Okay? Yes, there are members of the IDF who committed war crimes. I'm not ready to paint the entire IDF as being equally guilty. Just like we know the My Lai massacre over in Vietnam, and a lot of bad things were done in Vietnam. But again, not everybody in the military is part of those war crimes, and I think we need to draw a line between those who are actually guilty and those who are just in the back mopping floors and peeling potatoes. It's kind of hard to say they're part of the problem.
Well, unfortunately, the result of my investigation, for example, you mentioned the My Lai massacre. There was a My Lai massacre type event in Vietnam every month or two.
Yes, there were.
So it's not, you know, once people get into this situation, I mean,
okay, John, all I'm saying, we're almost done. John, we're almost out of time here. Let me just say this. Fine, let's find the people who committed the war crimes and prosecute them. Let's not just paint a very wide brush across all the military, because that helps the guilty hide. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, when we were talking about the police brutality in this country, and it is a problem, and I made the observation that for the public to see that their system is just, they must see the guilty punished and the innocent protected. And the same thing has to apply to the military, whether it's the IDF or the U.S. military. The ones who commit war crimes ought to be punished. The ones who are not part of those war crimes need to be protected. And I don't want to get into this huge wide brush of saying all of them are evil and deserve to be punished, because that's what led to the abuses of the Germans after World War II. Oh, they're all evil. We'll just slap them around. And, of course, now they're trying to get another Holocaust war crimes trial out of a guy who was a bookkeeper at Auschwitz. That was his job, you know, totaling up columns of figures, and, that's it, we've got another Nazi war criminal, and they're making a big deal out of it. All righty, we're going to grab a phone call here. Damien in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing okay.
I'm just calling, I just want to make a couple points. What John was saying, and I agree with you. And this is a problem that we have across the board. People, painting everything with a wide brush and then nothing ever getting done. There's so much because it's just constant distraction, finger pointing, and like that instead of the actual people accountable, seeing some kind of enforcement there. But so I have a lot of friends that I'm in New York City. Of course, as you know, this is a pretty big melting pot. I have friends of all backgrounds, and my Israeli friends that have gone through the military. My Italian friends too. I mean, I'm Italian as well. I didn't grow up there, but in other countries they've served the military as well. And in some places commensurate. But as far as Israel goes, a big thing of what they were doing was they were thinking of if boys that were younger or teenage or whatever, they were seeing them as an enemy because they were a potential enemy to strike against Israel. So that was their justification. And by that justification, Palestine can also say that everyone in Israel who serves in the military, which is a very large percentage of the citizens of Israel, is an enemy. So, that line of what they said to me was kind of ridiculous. And the policy that they had of this sort of, preemptive attack, this person, since we're, violating their human rights and everything else, they're probably most likely going to come and strike against us. Well, of course they are. Well, just stop doing what you're doing, just like the United States going and regime changing, et cetera, all these other things. So anyway, that's just one point I wanted to make about that. And it's, but I completely agree with you about the, painting things with a wide brush.
Well, it's a very complex issue because you also have a couple of other factors to look at, and that is, of course, the military command will do whatever it takes to get their conscripts to do what they're told, even if it's a war crime. We all remember the huge controversy of Lieutenant Aaron Watada, who stood up and said, I'm standing on the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I am allowed to refuse an illegal order. And they tried to make an example out of him, and it didn't really work out too well. We know certainly that U.S. troops sent into a war zone are given all of these very powerful psychiatric medications to make it easier for them to go out and do what they're told by their commanding officers. A lot of people,
no sane, rational thinking person would do these things.
That's exactly right. Now, we all know there's a methamphetamine problem in the illegal drug arena. What a lot of people don't understand is methamphetamine was originally invented as a battlefield drug, and it just got out of control there. So, and that's why we have a lot of these people coming back from the war zone, and as they get off the drugs, if they do, they all of a sudden wake up and realize they did some things that were really pretty horrible, and that messes up their heads. But, of course, there's no money to help them adjust to that trauma or reintegrate into society. The government's attitude is once you're in uniform, we can do whatever it takes to get you to accomplish what we think your goal ought to be, including sticking wires in your brain and giving you shocks that make you kill people. And so when these Israeli soldiers are coming out and saying they were ordered to target civilians, they're obviously having regrets. At the time they pulled the trigger, I don't know, were they stone cold sober? Were they on some kind of drug to get them to just go ahead and pull the trigger? We know that one of the common tactics military like to use is to dehumanize the enemy by hanging slang names on them. Like during Vietnam, the enemy were all Gooks or Charlie, to basically reduce them to this faceless, mass of targets.
Again, wide brush. Yeah, wide brush like you're talking.
Yeah, over in World War II in Germany, they were called Krauts. Over in the Japanese theater, they called them slants. And today, the American military is starting to use the word zombie to describe outraged Americans rioting in the streets. And that's why you hear all this talk about U.S. military, training for the zombie uprising. Zombie is now the slang term for we the American people who are just sick and tired of a government that's violated the Constitution, sick and tired of predatory financial institutions, But they're going to say, oh, there's zombies. So it makes it, especially after all the movies we've seen about, well, what do you do with a zombie? You just shoot him in the head. And that's part of the brainwashing.
I'm sorry, not to get off topic. I'll just say this really quick, just as a little bit of patriotic terrorism here. What you and Claire were talking about, if Claire is listening, or maybe you can pass the word on to her.
Yeah.
As far as the GMO, look into hemp. Hemp has been proven. There haven't been enough studies, but there need to be more studies to actually help to sap the GMO toxins from soil, and after a couple of rotations, actually bring the soil back, replenish the soil. And hemp, I mean, of course, you know the other things, properties of hemp. I mean, as far as fuel, all these, there's extreme amount. I can send you all kinds of things. I'm sure you're already aware.
Yeah, I would be asking about
those studies.
Okay, Damien, I have a question for you. Okay, and that is, how does hemp plant destroy GMO pollen, which is the primary contaminant in the aftermath of a GMO crop? That's what I'm not seeing.
What they're saying is that what they're doing, the combination of is what you were talking about yesterday, which is the burning.
Yeah.
And then using the hemp in a couple of rotations to replenish the soil.
Okay, that would make sense. Sense. Okay.
Yeah. So what you were saying was right on there. Please, Mike, when you get a chance, I know you're super busy. Joe Holden Microhydro, just if you even take a look at it, let me know what you feel about it. Joe Holden is hydro, not microhydro, hydropower. He used Tesla technology in hydropower, and it's really phenomenal. It's really something. Please take a look at.
Can you send me a URL in my email, okay? I need to let you go. We're coming to the end of the segment here, and a couple of commercial break here. I want to talk a little bit about David Cameron's very bizarre statement last week, where even if you are not suspected of committing a crime, the government has the right to come in and interfere with your life. And a lot of people are saying it's right out of George Orwell, and it is. And people are saying, what the heck is this all about? And what it's all about is, Cameron is saying, even if you are not in violation of the British law, his government will exercise its authority to come into your life to tell you that there are certain things you may not talk about, certain places you may not go, certain things that you may not say on social media, all on the suspicion that you might be a terror suspect, even if there's no evidence to support it. It's right out of Minority Report. The good news is, at the bottom of the article I linked to, 92% of the poll respondents were saying Cameron is just full of it. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Going to talk about the economy a little bit. And there's an article out of Investment Watch blog. Young and American, you're out of luck. The jobs picture is bleak. We know that. The unemployment numbers are a complete fabrication. We have 93 million Americans willing and able to work in this country who have not been able to find a job for years. And yet we lure these young people into college, offer them generous loans, and say when you get out of college, there'll be a high-paying job with which you can pay those loans back. And that, too, is a fiction. We have a huge student loan delinquency problem in this country because these kids, with their very expensively purchased college degrees, are working in retail and home service in areas where they don't really need the degree, because the jobs that require the degrees have all gone to other countries. And it was all very short-sighted. Nobody was really thinking about balancing college education against job market. In fact, they've completely abandoned the idea of making sure there is a job market. Because the only way our Ponzi scheme banking system can perpetuate is that as money is sucked up out of the bottom to the top and harvested, somehow that money must recycle back down to the bottom so that ordinary working people can transform their labor into decent wages and salaries and pour that money back into the bottom of the system. And that's the part that's collapsed. And nobody's thinking about that. Everybody's just out there grabbing as much as they can while they can. Story out of RINF.com, the Tories may cut 100,000 jobs over the next 5 years because they're all about austerity and the British people wanted austerity, and that's the explanation for David Cameron and the Tories' surprise, overwhelming landslide victory, even as the police continue to investigate allegations of massive election fraud going on. Another story coming out of here from Zero Hedge, belligerent U.S. refuses to cede control over the IMF in a snub to China. Now, IMF, the International Monetary Fund, it's another one of those names to confuse you as to what's really going on. It's like Federal Reserve. Makes it sound like it's part of the federal government. It isn't. It's a privately owned central bank. It's no more federal than Federal Express. The International Monetary Fund is not international. It's an American institution. And we're seeing this fight already building for the coming debate over what currencies will be in that recognized basket of international currencies. And China's coming on strong. And the U.S. is trying to find some way to block that, potentially with an outright war. Now, there was an interesting article over at ShareEverything.com in which the IMF sort of dances around the admission that having a public currency that is entirely the proceeds of a loaned interest is, in fact, the root of all evil and all instability in the system, which is what we've been telling you here for years now. It's inherently unstable. It has to crash and come on down. And they know it. The IMF is sort of hedging around and saying, yeah, there's some merit to this. But they do it because it brings huge profits to them. And people somewhere in the future have to pay the price for it. That's the scam. The people who set up the Federal Reserve lived their lives in immense wealth, privilege, and luxury, and went to their graves absolutely happy with what they'd done. Because the people who would pay the price for their little pyramid scheme hadn't even been born yet. It's not their problem. They'll muddle through it somehow. It's not our problem. We got ours now. That's all that matters. It's how money junkies think. Just like any other addict. I'm feeling good now. Doesn't matter what's going to happen tomorrow, or next year, or next century. Now, over at Zero Hedge, they've got this Keynesian economist, Ken Rogoff, who is joining the call for a ban on all cash in order that government can centrally plan everything in the lives of we, the people. Well, first of all, central planning is a total dictatorship. And central planning doesn't have a good track record of actually working. Just look at the former Soviet Union, which believed in central planning. Now, the reasons to ban cash from the point of view of the bankers is that it prevents anybody from being able to rob a bank, at least directly. And computer hackers can still hack into it, and that's happening a lot. But it also primarily prevents a bank run. If the customers go to the bank and say, I want my money out, the bank's going to say, all right, what other bank do I ship it to? There's nothing I can give you. And that's the other big payoff. There's about $1.3 trillion in currency in the pockets of Americans right now. A ban on cash will put that money back into the banking system. You'll have your little plastic card, and all of your transactions will simply move the money from one place in the banking system to someplace else in the banking system. And it's still in the banking system to be used to play the banker games, like meeting their cash reserve requirements and so forth. Okay? Now, that may be well and good. I think there are some major reasons this is not going to work out. First and foremost, that I don't think Americans are ready to surrender that last bit of freedom of actually having some of their wealth in their own pocket to spend on a whim for cotton candy or a magazine or to give to some hungry homeless person at the stop sign who doesn't have the little plastic card terminal with which to support them. We know that organized crime lives on a cash-based anonymous economy, and whether you like it or not, organized crime still has a great deal of influence in Washington, D.C. They always have. Then you have the various intelligence agencies which require untraceable cash to pay informants, bribe officials, buy clandestine weaponry. Don't forget, the CIA has been engaged in drug smuggling for decades to fund covert operations outside congressional control. Whether it was heroin out of Vietnam or cocaine up from Central America, the CIA basically would lose a tremendous amount of their autonomy in a cash ban. And so for that very reason, I think the CIA is going to work against this. It's one of the few times I find myself in agreement with the CIA. Now, we're seeing more and more concern over these coming corporate trade agreements. People are very concerned over the fact that they're being conducted in secret. Very obviously, the government does not want us to know what they are getting ready to trade away in our name. One of the biggest arguments that is coming out of those leaks from TPP and TTIP is that it's an attack on our right to know what is in the products that we buy. I was very surprised when we had the phone call the other day where up in Canada, they don't have to put the ingredients on cosmetics. That would be a big headache for me and my wife because there are ingredients, common ingredients in cosmetics that cause her severe joint pain. And apparently we already know the Trans-Pacific Partnership wants to ban GMO labeling. And now, of course, we're hearing that the World Trade Organization is jumping the gun by outlawing labels on meat where it comes from. So you don't know if that hamburger you're buying came from Texas, somewhere in Canada, somewhere down in Mexico. Because supposedly it's unfair to the nations that produce inferior beef products if you know where it comes from. It's unfair to those more distant beef providers if you know that your meat came from several time zones away rather than the farm just down the street. And it's okay for you to get food poisoning because that's just a small price to pay to keep trade fair across the North American Union. That's their attitude. They don't care if you get sick. They're just out there to keep the economy under their control. So, anyway, we're coming up on our top of the hour news break. We come on back, more about the economy, more about human-caused global warming, vaccines in the news again. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about these trade treaties, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Basically, it's more or less the same deal on both of them. It's just the direction and who's getting involved with it. And this appears to be a desperate grab for corporate power across the globe. The transition between a multipolar nation-state world and the new world order under corporate banking rule. And a lot of people are going along with it. They're very well paid to do it. Republican leaders are vowing they will pass the fast track for Obama. Now, over at Democracy for America, they have found information that the government, if this TPP passes, is going to be required to pay financial compensation to American businesses and American workers who will be harmed by TPP. Guess where they're going to get the cash? They're going to cut Medicare by $700 million. Now, there are a couple of problems with that. First of all, the people who are dependent on Medicare. Second of all, Medicare is, along with Social Security, using money that actually belongs to the American people. The American people entrust the government with their money to be managed and made available when they need it. And the government is not actually legally allowed to simply take the Social Security money and spend it as general revenues, even though they have been doing that at least since the Clinton administration. So they're going to give the store away to the corporations, and those Americans who have reached retirement age are just going to be left out in the cold. Go on off and die. We don't need you anymore here. Now, Senator Jeff Sessions, Republican of Alabama, is not going along with the fast-track situation. He has actually read the entire Trans-Pacific Partnership, went in there day after day reading it, was not allowed to take notes, was not allowed to make copies. But apparently he's got a very good memory. And he wrote out a 5-page letter to the Republican Party as to why the TPP is a disaster for the American economy and the American people. It basically is trying to serve the interests of the globalists, the New World Order of one planet under one bank and one management, ruled by an incredibly wealthy elite lording over a population which is, by design and government edict, hovering at the edge of starvation and poverty. One of the other alarming situations in there is that Congress is getting the short end of the deal. That a lot of authority Congress currently has is being transferred over to the executive branch. Consolidation of power. The agreement eliminates Congress' ability to amend or debate trade implementing legislation at all. In other words, this fast track for TPP will become a permanent feature of the U.S. government. The deals will be made by whoever's in the Oval Office, and Congress doesn't have anything to say about it. Congress obviously is being paid a great deal of money to surrender that authority. But, of course, we've seen a Congress that just doesn't want to be interested. They're not interested in being bothered. Whether, we're going to war, we'll pre-authorize the war for the president. He can go and do that. Trade agreement, we'll fast-track that. The only time the Congress has wanted to actually do its job of oversight was regarding the P5+1 deal with Iran, and they want to kill it because that's what their masters in Tel Aviv are ordering them to do. Under the heading of Rank Has Its Privilege, Kurt Johnson, who's an heir to the Johnson & Johnson fortune. Remember Michelle Rosen was here the other day talking about the whole Tylenol cover-up. Apparently, he was charged with repeated sexual assault of a child in 2011. Molested his stepdaughter repeatedly between the ages of, 12 and 15. And he basically got out with a wrist slap because he's considered a productive member of society. Anybody else convicted of the same crime would have gone away to jail for 40 years. And he got a walk. Because he's rich. The rich people don't get prosecuted. We don't prosecute the rich and the powerful for molesting children. It's just the same rule they have in Great Britain. Remember the Franklin scandal here in the U.S.? The rich and powerful really do see themselves as a separate species, distinct from the rest of humanity, with a separate set of rules. The laws, those are for the little people, the plebes, the serfs. They have to follow the laws. We're above the laws because we're rich here. All righty, let's see. Story out of ex-Republic TV. Obamacare exchanges are melting down across America. They are going bankrupt. Between the problems with the software, the problems with people just not being able to afford these more expensive policies, it has turned into a huge financial disaster. Over at American Thinker, they have an article. 1 in 4 Americans who purchased these mandated Obamacare insurance policies still cannot afford medical care because of the sky-high deductibles. And I'm one of them, I might add. Another article coming out of the New York Post. Obamacare is a major threat to New York's hospitals. Because under Obamacare, the government has cut more than $800 million in payments to the city's Health and Hospitals Corporation, or will be cutting it by fiscal year 2019. Because illegal immigrants don't qualify for Obamacare coverage. And they make up a big chunk of New York's uninsured population. Obamacare is a complete disaster. It failed its overt purpose of making health care affordable to Americans. It failed its true covert purpose of bringing in massive new tax revenues to a desperately broke government. And still, they will not admit it's a problem, will not admit it's wrong, will not turn around and change course, because they're the government and they're infallible, and they never admit when they're wrong, no matter how obvious it is to everybody that this whole Obamacare has turned into a flustercluck. Over at the immigration courts, the backlog of cases there has hit an all-time high of 445,000 cases waiting to be heard. And down at the Border Patrol, they're saying there is now a spike in human smuggling into the United States of America. And all those people coming into the United States of America, in addition to going up to New York and being a burden on their medical system, they're going out to California, where they're a burden on the water system and the sewage system and the transportation system. They're bringing in communicable diseases that have been absent from this country for years, including tuberculosis. And that's another absolute disaster that they will not admit was wrong. We have a president who is just totally narcissistic. He's never wrong, no matter how wrong he is. And that is a terrible policy, especially when you're brushing up against the possibility of a new world war. Let's see, another article, more and more indications. This is from Vox.com. Hillary Clinton personally taking money from companies that were trying to influence her as Secretary of State. In this case, through honorariums for speaking engagements. Apparently, the Clinton Foundation has only spent 6% of its assets on actual charitable functions. Nobody knows where the rest went. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, I just put up a story at whatreallyhappened.com in which Judicial Watch has succeeded in obtaining a memo sent by the Department of Defense to Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton within hours of the attack on the Benghazi consulate, saying that they knew that this had been planned at least 10 days ahead of time. Now remember, the story we got from Obama and Clinton was that this was a spontaneous retaliation to this 12-minute internet trailer for this movie about Mohammed, which we then found out had been faked very quickly, because the people who are actually in this video came forward to say, this isn't what we said when we were being filmed. Somebody overdubbed it to just come up with this highly offensive video and, oh gosh, look at all those Muslims and they're reacting to it. But now we have a memo from the Department of Defense that they knew this was being planned at least 10 days ahead of time. So Obama and Clinton lied about the reasons for the attack on the consulate. And if they had advance notice 10 days, why was the consulate's request for additional security turned down? Now, as you know, I have my own theory about what happened in Benghazi. Now, Benghazi apparently was being used as a hub for gun running, for weapons from the coup d'etat in Libya to kill Gaddafi, get rid of the golden hour, put Libya's oil back on the world market for the U.S. dollar. And with that over, they were smuggling the weapons into Syria for the hired mercenaries to use to kick out Bashar al-Assad. And Libya was the transition point. Benghazi was the transition point. And they decided they needed to shut it down. Now, when this all went down, Obama was trailing in the polls against Mitt Romney, and he needed a PR stunt to remind the American people that he is the president and he will act presidential. And so what I think happened, and this is confirmed by the fact that they knew this was coming down 10 days ahead of time, there was a drone, a Predator, orbiting overhead, real-timing video back to the White House Situation Room. Now, contrary to what you see in movies, the Predator is not a very fast platform. It's built for long-range, endurance, best mileage you can get. Its top speed is about 130. That's it. So that Predator had to be launched before the attack on the consulate began. I think this was going to be another false flag attack. They had an action team that was going to play at Al-Qaeda. They were going to go into the consulate, kidnap the ambassador, and hold him hostage. Oh, crisis in the Mideast. The corporate media would stop following Mitt Romney around. They'd all be focused on the consulate in Benghazi. They'd let the drama build for day after day after day. What is going to be done? And then Obama would swoop in and resolve the situation, proving that he wasn't a new Jimmy Carter. And he'd come out looking like a hero and ride the tide of public approval into his reelection. But the best laid plans of mice and men gang after glee, and if you look at the location of the consulate through Google Earth, you will see there are residential areas nearby. We know that the gunfire from the initial assault on the consulate was heard at the CIA's annex several blocks away. And I think what happened is the Libyan people living next to the consulate said, oh good, they're kicking out the Americans, let's join on in. And Obama's carefully choreographed theater presentation turned into this wild, out-of-control mob scene during which the ambassador and 3 others were killed. And it went from being a PR stunt to make Obama looking like a hero to an absolute epic fail, and they've been trying to cover up for it ever since. I think that's what happened. Because we know we have a president who's obsessed with his image. It's all about illusion. When the Pakistanis got the guy in the house in Abbottabad, Obama swoops in to grab the body and say, I'm the one who got Osama bin Laden. Then it turns out it's not him, and they got to dump him in the ocean. Over the last weekend in Syria, the Syrian government claims they got this ISIS leader. The U.S. is out there saying, don't believe what the Syrian government says. We did it. We're the heroes out there. We have seen within the halls of Washington, D.C., within the bowels of power, the triumph of shadow over substance. They're so used to dealing with image and illusion and public relations. They don't know any other way to think about these things. Now, another very telling insight into the political mind comes to us courtesy of Al Sharpton's daughter, Dominique Sharpton, who supposedly sprained her ankle when she stumbled over some uneven pavement at the corner of Broome Street and Broadway last year and sued the city of New York for $5 million. Pain and suffering and permanent impairment from stumbling over this uneven pavement. Okay? And then, to show you that some people who are politicians can be incredibly stupid, last Saturday, Dominique Sharpton posted a selfie to Instagram of herself and a friend at the peak of a mountain in Bali that they had hiked up to. So she's there smiling above the clouds here, and I think she just destroyed her own $5 million lawsuit. Now, we've been talking about all these kids in the schools who are dealing with these horrible, horrible Michelle Obama school lunches, and they take pictures, and they post them out on social media. They go viral. Schools are now prohibiting kids from taking their cell phones to lunch. And the USDA has launched a media campaign of photos of the Michelle Obama lunches and launched it all over the web to show, see, this is what we're feeding the kids. And they're obviously staged photos. You can see that they're under controlled light. They got stand lights around. It's all very professionally shot. It's a PR campaign. And this reveals much that has gone wrong with the United States of America. Nobody even thinks about actually fixing a problem anymore. It's easier and cheaper to simply hire public relations firms to propagandize the product away, or the problem away. Oh, the lunches are great. See, we've got all these stage studio photos of really healthy-looking lunches. This is what you should believe your kids are being fed. Another example of that is, not too long ago, over at Oklahoma, scientists came out and said this surge of quakes we're seeing in our state have to be linked to fracking. And by the way, they've had a few more today. And when we come back from this commercial break, I'm going to tell you how the oil companies responded to that. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about Oklahoma, which prior to the fracking industry had no seismicity in their history. It just didn't happen there. Ever since fracking, they're getting lots and lots of these small quakes. They had 4 more today, plus the one near Dallas you probably heard about on the SRN news break. And last month, the Oklahoma Geological Survey released a statement that the rapid increase in seismic activity was very likely caused by fracking. So apparently, Harold Hamm, the founder and CEO of Continental Resources, one of America's 10 biggest energy independents, went to the dean of the University of Oklahoma's College of Earth and Energy and said, "You fire those scientists." And from an email that was leaked by Dean Larry Grillett, he's actually considering it. Oh, we've offended the oil company by saying this. And it gets back to what I was saying before. We've reached a stage in our nation's history, nobody wants to actually fix a problem. Because it's easier to just go on out and shout down the people pointing out the problem, whether it's Michelle Rosen and the Tylenol murders, the problems with the vaccines, the problems with GMO. As long as they're making money, the government's happy with them, and they'll just go on putting out dangerous products, engaging in dangerous practices. I don't know about you. I don't want any fracking wells and fracking quakes taking place around that Yellowstone supervolcano, and they're getting into that area. But that's it. And that's another hallmark of fascism. Nobody works to make things good. They just work to make them look good. If it looks good, that's all anybody needs. The media will report it's good if it looks good. We don't care what it's actually like inside, how badly rotted it is. All right, we're going to find a phone call here. Glenn in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. It's not what I called in about, but while you're doing it, Oklahoma's neo-feudal. Because they know they belong to the land,
yeah.
And the land they belong to the prince.
Yes, good point.
Yeah. Actually, what I called in about was like your opinion as a media professional on this one. It's intriguing. I found this. People are always into date setting for apocalypticism and events and stuff like that. But you may recall that, like after 9/11, I'm sure you're aware of all the media references to 9/11 that were found in retrospect after the fact, like the Bart Simpson with the picture on the wall going, or the lone gunman episode and all those sorts of things. They found all these 9/11 references in movies and TV shows that were aired before it, but that were found in retrospect. Well, this is intriguing. There's if you go on YouTube and you search the term the Illuminati know what is coming. There's this woman, there are a number of people do it. This one woman does this 4-part series, they're relatively short clips, showing all of these TV shows and movies with September 23rd. It's basically the time period, September 26th through the 24th this year, with all these references to September 23rd in all sorts of movies, TVs, music, references from TV shows in the 90s like Third Rock or music songs from as far back as 78. And in all recent movies,
Glenn,
9/23, yeah.
Glenn, there's only so many days in a year, and a lot of dates get used over and over and over again. In the Terminator series, they have the end of the world take place on my birthday, and I can tell you most assuredly, I'm not planning to end the world, no matter how old I get. Right. All right, so Glenn, thank you very much for the phone. We're going to let you go here and not get drawn off into this fringy stuff. The people who are behind what's going on want to send us all off on a false trail. The Illuminati. They're somewhere out there on the other side of the world. You'll never find them, but go ahead and look. The real authors of what's going on in the world today are right downtown in those banking offices, those government buildings. That's as far as you need to look. That's it, right there. Propagandists love to leave a false trail. It's the Bilderbergers. And I'm not saying the Bilderbergers aren't real and they're not having their little coffee clatch every year to figure out how to divide the world up among themselves. But I'm sure that's where they get together and say, we'll tell them it's the Illuminati. It's the reptilians. It's all the rest of this other stuff. No. The people who are causing the damage, they're right in front of you. They just hope you don't notice it. By the way, yesterday we had a little bit of an accident here on the island of Oahu. A V-22 Osprey on a training flight suffered what the military called a hard landing, and the witnesses called a crash. One person dead, several other wounded. And immediately responding to that, the governor of Okinawa has said Osprey flights over Okinawa are now banned because apparently the problems with these things are not solved. And they have a very bad habit of just falling out of the air. It's like all of the other U.S. military hardware. It just doesn't do what it's supposed to do. They're starting to put F-22s in museums now. That's how useless they are. And there is a huge protest going on in Okinawa. Thousands of people. They filled up an entire stadium. They don't want foreign military presence in Japan. No country wants a foreign military presence in their country. All of these countries with these 700 U.S. bases in them, they want their land back. They want the garrison gone. Tell the legionnaires to take their shields and their hats with the red fuzzy thing on top and go back to Rome and leave us alone. That's what's going on here. Alrighty, let's see more about the spying and kill. I want to talk quickly about the kill switch. I may put off the global warming stuff until tomorrow. Now, there is supposedly a U.S. policy, Standard Operating Procedure 303, which is a process to shut down the cell phones. Okay, and a lot of people didn't realize the government had a kill switch, and this was apparently brought to the fore because back in 2011, San Francisco officials shut down cell phones to prevent a protest. And that is a tacky no-no, because that is a violation of the First Amendment right to freedom of speech and freedom to assemble. There is no law that overrides those rights. There cannot be, because under the Supreme Court decision, Marbury versus Madison, laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. Some official in San Francisco pulled the plug on the cell phone system because they wanted to, and they had no legal foundation for doing so. And by pulling the plug on the cell phone system, shutting it down, because they didn't want to deal with all those smelly, ordinary people, they violated one of the most basic rights, two of the most basic rights the American people possessed. And they also placed those Americans in emergency situations at risk because their communications failed. They also caused untold economic harm to those Americans in the area who were using their cell phones for business purposes during the outage. And the responsible party needs to be removed from office, made an example of, and made personally financially liable for the harm caused to life and property shutting off the cell phone system. If somebody outside the government shut off the cell phone system, they would call it an act of terror. And they did it to prevent a protest. Government is not allowed to prevent a protest. That's in the rules. If you don't want to play by the rules, find another line of work. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to last segment of our program today on this Monday. And, of course, the corporate media is still out there saying ISIS is coming into America. ISIS is sneaking in across the border. ISIS is coming in inside FedEx boxes of cookies. Who knows? Funny how when they have a real act of terror or plan of terror, they don't really want to talk about it too much. It seems that there's a gentleman down near Chattanooga, 63-year-old guy, Robert Rankin Dogart, lived on Signal Mountain, was a former congressional candidate for the 3rd District, And he has been charged with plotting the annihilation of an entire Muslim village in upstate New York. And he's entered a plea agreement acknowledging his guilt. Was talking about just burning down the school, burning down the mosque, shooting people as they ran from the flames. He's looking at 5 years in federal prison. And funny how the same corporate media that's out there screaming about ISIS is coming to get you just can't seem to find the ink, or in this case the electrons, to really talk about this guy. You know, he's the wrong type. Nobody commits terror against Muslims. We can't let anybody feel sorry for them. By the way, interesting story, you've probably seen it over the weekend, where the corporate media and Amtrak are trying to make a big deal over a shattered windshield on the train that derailed. And they're out there saying a projectile may have struck the windshield of Amtrak train 188 just minutes before the train crashed. And the FBI has been called in. Projectile could mean anything. Could mean a cannon shell. Could be an empty beer bottle. Could be something blowing in the wind. Now, let's be honest. There is no projectile that's going to hit the windshield that will cause the train to speed up to more than twice the speed limit on that rail of tracks. But they're putting this focus on the projectile. And, the projectile somehow caused the derailment to protect Amtrak from any civil liability, arising from the fact that the train was, in fact, traveling at more than double the speed limit. The speed limit had, the track would have held the speed limit. It was wrong to be over there, but that wasn't the derailment. It was derailed by the projectile. So you can't sue Amtrak. You see how these corporations work? Protect the profits at all times. All righty. All right, real quick, latest news from human-caused global warming. Cold temperature records set in Saskatchewan. Broken records that have stood since 1895 in North Battleford and 1923 in Swift Current. It's snowing in Moorhead, Minnesota, and Fargo, North Dakota today. And they're talking about the possibility that they're going to have snow for Memorial Day weekend in Colorado. And down under in Australia, they're already seeing indications of an early, hard winter coming on. And the carbon Nazis are out there saying, well, they had a record hot temperature over in Spain. Look at all the girls in bikinis. See? Here's the problem. Back in 2000, the carbon Nazis were telling us all that because of human-caused global warming, snow and ice were a thing of the past. That's the problem. Some of them are trying to out there saying, well, no, global warming causes snow and ice, really, and weather and climate are two completely different things. No, they aren't. Climate is weather averaged over time. If you've got a lot of cold weather, you've got a cold climate. But the UN's Agenda 21 justification for taking control of your life is based on you are warming the world. And that's why they're trying to keep this thing going. And again, we have a president, an administration that is just pathologically incapable of admitting they were wrong about anything. Whether it was Iraq, Ukraine, Obamacare, immigration, and of course, human-caused global warming. Now, John Oliver's got his Last Week Tonight show. And I've really enjoyed some of the more recent episodes, like the one about how despite decades of allegations of child labor sweatshops, the clothing companies are still doing it. They're just using cutouts to duck the blame. But last night he was talking about chicken farming and how chicken farmers are as abused by the big food corporations like Tyson as anybody else in this country. And the reason that I wanted to call attention to that, if you can catch the replay, you will see how these farmers are right on the edge. They're literally contractually blocked from coming out and saying how badly they're treated. There's retaliation against them. They have no rights whatsoever. And just like we saw in India with the BT cotton, we have chicken farmers here in the United States of America who are being driven to suicide by the abusive practices of these large corporations. And the reason it's worth paying attention to is because this avian flu is turning out to be a serious, serious problem and could very easily drive most of these small independent chicken farmers out of business. They have no margin, no cushion, no safety whatsoever. We're already hearing that we may be looking at a turkeyless Thanksgiving this year. Just get a can of Spam and sort of mush it together so it looks like a turkey or something like that. We're already hearing that eggs are in short supply in the markets. And one of the reasons this avian flu has spread like wildfire are the conditions under which these poultry are kept, where they're kept in these dark areas, crowded together. They're not allowed to get sunshine or fresh air. They're kept in the dark, just fed. They're not allowed to move around because that makes them grow bigger and fatter more quickly. And it also means that one sick chicken will infect all of them. It is a problem. Here in Hawaii, we're continuing to see an escalation in the small quakes along the southern rift zone, south of Kilauea, southwest of Kilauea on the Big Island. We're starting to see articles in places like, Associated Press, that these earthquakes could signal a new eruption or otherwise major event. And we're keeping an eye on that as well. So we'll be looking at that here. Oh, let's see. We linked a documentary you might want to look at. It's called Failure to Obey. And as you know, last year, Obama signed an executive order that basically declares anywhere in the United States of America that is within 100 miles of a national border is a Constitution-free zone. Under Marbury versus Madison, that is an illegal order for the president to give, but we are now seeing random checkpoints within 100 miles of a national border where you can be stopped and searched without a warrant. And this documentary talks about this gentleman named Stephen Anderson, who objected and was thrown in jail for failure to obey. That's apparently a new crime here in the United States of America. Now, they didn't find anything in his car. He was thrown in prison for refusing to allow an unconstitutional search of his car. Here in Hawaii, of course, there is no place in the entire state that is more than 100 miles from the national border, which is our shoreline. So we're a Constitution-free state, according to Barack Obama. They're getting really, really too big for their britches, I think is a good way to describe that here. Let's see. The United Nations has come out with their review of human rights here in the United States of America, and to nobody's surprise, was highly critical of the institutionalized racism and brutality in our police system. So the United States can no longer hold itself up as a bastion of human rights. The UN says we're down there with the other baddies. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get some animation work done. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices, share what you know with who you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.